It was a rainy afternoon in San Francisco when Elon Musk stepped out of his meeting with investors. The sky had darkened quickly, and the light rain had turned into a downpour. His driver had texted him, saying the traffic was heavy, so Elon decided to walk a few blocks back to his office. The cool air and rhythmic patter of the rain helped clear his mind after a long meeting. He pulled his jacket tighter, quickening his pace along Market Street. The streets were wet, people rushing by with umbrellas, seemingly oblivious to the weather. Elon wasn't in a hurry, but his mind was focused. His thoughts spun around the investor meeting, his upcoming plans, and the never-ending pace of work that surrounded him. San Francisco had become a city he hardly recognized anymore, and he often found himself retreating to his own thoughts when walking through it. As he passed an old apartment building, something caught his eye. A woman was standing on the steps outside, holding a piece of paper, staring down at it. The rain soaked her hair, her posture was drooping, and she looked completely defeated. There was something familiar about her, but it took him a moment to place her face. Then it clicked. Miriam Sanchez. She had cleaned his apartment many years ago when he was just starting out. Back then, he had barely enough money to keep his head above water. Miriam was one of the few people who had shown him kindness when he was barely making ends meet, leaving him flowers and homemade meals during those lonely nights when he worked into the early hours. But now, standing in front of this weathered building, Miriam didn't look like the same person. Her once vibrant face was now lined with age, and her shoulders were hunched as if the weight of the world was on them. Elon slowed down, his curiosity and concern overtaking his professional mind. He walked towards her, a sense of urgency tugging at him. "Miriam," he called out. She looked up at him, her eyes widening in confusion. Recognition quickly followed. "Elon, is that really you?" Her voice was full of disbelief, but there was a warmth behind it that brought back memories. Elon smiled, feeling a rush of familiarity and gratitude. "Of course, I remember you. You were the one who kept my apartment clean when I was just getting started. You were always so kind to me." Miriam's eyes softened as she nodded, but there was a sadness behind them. "It's been a long time. I didn't expect you to remember me after all these years." Elon glanced at her again, noticing the eviction notice clenched in her hand. "What's going on, Miriam? You look like you've had a rough day." Miriam let out a deep sigh, her eyes glancing down at the paper. "I've been living here for over a decade. The rent has gone up steadily, and now, with my health getting worse, I just can't keep up anymore. My landlord just gave me an eviction notice." She paused for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm going to do." Elon's heart sank. He took a quick look at the eviction notice, noticing the large rent increase, almost 40%. "This is outrageous," he muttered. "How long have you lived here?" "Over 12 years. Miriam said softly, her voice heavy with the weight of her struggles. "This neighborhood is changing. More and more tech people are moving in, and the prices just keep going up. It's getting harder for people like me to stay." She hesitated. "No offense, Elon. I know you're part of that." Elon was taken aback for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "No offense taken," he said, his voice calm but serious. "But this is wrong. You've been here for 12 years. You shouldn't have to worry about being pushed out." Miriam wiped a tear from her eye. "I never wanted to ask for help. I've always managed. But now, with my health, I don't know how I'll manage this time." Elon glanced at the notice again, his mind racing. He remembered the early days of his career, the stress, the sleepless nights, and the people who had helped him when he needed it most. Miriam had been one of those people. He couldn't just walk away. "Miriam, listen," he said, his voice firm. "I want to help you. Let's go get out of the rain, and we can talk more." Miriam looked at him with a mixture of surprise and hesitation, but after a beat, she nodded. The two of them crossed the street, making their way into a small coffee shop that had an inviting warmth. The rain was coming down even harder now, but inside, they found a quiet corner to sit. Elon ordered his coffee and, remembering Miriam's old preference, asked for a hot chocolate for her. Miriam looked at him, clearly surprised that he remembered something so small from all those years ago. "So, tell me more," Elon said after they sat down. "How have you been?" Miriam let out a breath, her shoulders relaxing as she sat back. Life's been okay, I guess. My kids are doing well. Michael is teaching now, and Laura's a nurse in LA. They both want to help me, but they've got their own families. They're struggling too. She paused for a moment, her eyes betraying her pride. I've always been able to manage. I never wanted to burden anyone. Elon listened intently. Miriam had always been hardworking, even back when she was cleaning his apartment. She'd worked multiple jobs to provide for her family. But now, after an illness and rising costs, she was in danger of losing everything. What about your clients? Didn't they want to bring you back after you got better? Elon asked gently. Some of them moved away, Miriam said with a shrug. San Francisco's just too expensive for most people now, even those who can afford it. The medical bills took up a lot of my savings, and now I can't keep up with the rent. Elon felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Here he was, one of the richest men in the world, while Miriam, a woman who had once shown him so much kindness, was struggling just to survive. His decision was clear. Miriam, Elon said firmly, I want to help you with this rent situation. I'll cover your back rent and help with your medical bills. Miriam shook her head. Elon, I didn't tell you all this because I want your money. I just didn't expect to see you again, that's all. Elon smiled gently. I know, Miriam, but I want to help. You helped me when I needed it. Now, let me do the same for you. Miriam hesitated, but after a moment she agreed. Elon wrote her a check that would cover her rent for the next 6 months. Her hands trembled as she took the check, overwhelmed by the gesture. Thank you, she whispered, but I don't know how I can ever repay you. You don't need to, Elon said softly. Just take care of yourself. Don't worry about the rent for now. We'll figure out a long-term solution. As they parted ways, the rain had stopped and the streets were beginning to dry. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city. Elon stood for a moment, watching Miriam walk away. There was something about that brief encounter that felt important. More than just helping one person. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines. But Elon couldn't shake the image of Miriam standing on the apartment steps, holding that eviction notice in her hand. Despite his many responsibilities, he found himself thinking about her, wondering how she was coping. What she had told him in the coffee shop had resonated deeply. She was the kind of person who worked tirelessly her whole life, but now, through no fault of her own, was on the verge of losing everything. Elon had been born into a different kind of struggle. He had faced challenges in his youth, yes, but his struggles were different. His mother had worked long hours to support the family, but they had always had a roof over their heads. Miriam, on the other hand, had built her life from the ground up in the harshest of circumstances. Now, she was fighting against a system that didn't seem to care. Elon decided he needed to check in on her again. He had to understand more about her life, about why it seemed so unfair that a woman who had worked hard for so long could end up in this position. So, 3 days later, he found himself standing outside her building again, a small bag of sandwiches from a local deli in his hand, along with fresh fruit. When Miriam opened the door, she looked surprised to see him. Elon, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice a little breathless. I wanted to check in, he said, holding up the bag. I brought lunch. Thought you might like something different for a change. She smiled, though there was a trace of exhaustion behind her eyes. Well, come on in, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Her apartment was small but clean, with little touches that made it feel warm. Plants on the windowsill and family photos scattered on the walls. She led him to the tiny kitchen, where a stack of mending lay on the table. Miriam quickly cleared the space, though she seemed reluctant to put down the pile of clothes. Please sit down, she insisted, setting the table. Elon unpacked the sandwiches and fruit, and as they sat, Miriam filled 2 mismatched mugs with coffee. She seemed to relax a little as the conversation shifted to more casual topics. Your landlord got your payment? Elon asked, his voice soft. Miriam nodded. Yes, I spoke to him. He was very surprised. He said I could stay, at least for now. Her smile showed a little relief. I'm not sure how long that will last, though. I'm glad you're not being forced out yet, Elon said, leaning back in his chair. But it's still not right. It shouldn't be this hard for someone who's worked their whole life. Miriam shrugged. I don't know. It's just how it is now. I've worked for so long. I was just hoping to get a little peace when I'm older, but it's like everything keeps slipping away. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I'm not asking for pity. I've just been trying to figure out what comes next. Elon nodded thoughtfully. I get that, but I think the system needs to change. People like you, Miriam, people who clean, who care for others, they shouldn't have to fight for their own place to live in the city they helped build. There has to be a better way. Miriam smiled at him gently. You always were a dreamer, Elon, she said, her tone affectionate but tinged with sadness. I used to think the same way when I was younger. I believed that if you worked hard enough, things would always get better. But the truth is, sometimes the harder you work, the harder it gets. The more you try, the further away things seem. Elon looked at her, really looking at her, for the first time since their meeting a few days ago. There was something deeply familiar in her words. He remembered his own mother working tirelessly, never complaining. She had always said the same thing, that the world didn't owe you anything, but you had to keep pushing forward. He realized that Miriam had lived through much of the same type of struggle, without the same safety nets or recognition that he had eventually received. So, tell me about your life before all this happened, Elon said, leaning forward, curious. Miriam hesitated for a moment before beginning. I came to America 30 years ago from Mexico. My husband and I left because there was nothing for us back home. No opportunities, no work. We had nothing, really. But we had each other, and that was enough for a while. She paused, looking away for a moment, as if collecting herself. I started cleaning houses to make ends meet. I worked long hours, 5 houses a day sometimes. I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford bus fare. My hands were cracked and bleeding from the cleaning chemicals, but I didn't mind. It was all for my kids. Elon was struck by the quiet strength in her words. She was telling her story without complaint, but he could sense the weight of it, the sheer effort it had taken to get this far. Tell me about your children, Elon said, trying to shift the conversation to something more uplifting. Miriam's eyes brightened. My son Michael, he's a teacher now. He's been at it for years, working in an inner-city school. And my daughter Laura, she's a nurse. She's in Los Angeles. I'm so proud of them both. Elon smiled. You must be. Raising children to do that, it's a big achievement. They both wanted to help me, Elon, Miriam said. But they're struggling too. They have their own families to care for. I never wanted to be a burden on them. I wanted to be able to give them a better life. Elon sat back in his chair, processing what she had said. He remembered his own struggles when he was just starting out, but he also remembered the people who had helped him along the way, even when he was barely scraping by. Miriam had done the same for her children, and now she was struggling alone. What about your work, he asked. Did you have many clients before you got sick? Miriam shook her head. I had a steady stream of clients, but then I got sick. I was in the hospital for over 2 weeks. When I came back, many of my regulars had already found new housekeepers. Others moved away. It's tough. San Francisco is too expensive now for a lot of people. Even the rich people who could afford to hire me can't afford to live here anymore. Elon frowned. The irony wasn't lost on him. A woman who cleaned the homes of the wealthy can't even afford a home herself. Miriam's eyes shifted to the window, watching the rain begin to slow outside. I don't want charity. I never did. But this isn't living, Elon. I worked hard all my life. I just want to be able to live out my years in peace. Elon was silent for a moment. Then a thought began to form, something bigger than just helping Miriam with her immediate problems. He realized that the issue was much larger than her. It was about the system. It was broken, and Miriam's story was only one example of the countless people who had been left behind. I have an idea, he said slowly. I think we need to change the system, and I think I can help. Miriam looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I'm going to help you with your rent, Elon said, but I also want to do something bigger. I want to make sure people like you, people who work hard, who keep everything running, have a place to live. No one should have to struggle just to survive. Miriam stared at him, her expression shifting from disbelief to hope. You really think you can make a difference? Elon nodded. I have to try. Over the following week, Elon couldn't stop thinking about Miriam. Her words haunted him. The more he thought about her story, the more he realized that it wasn't just her situation that was broken. It was a system that had failed so many people like her. Miriam's struggle was just one example of how deeply flawed the housing system was, how those who worked the hardest, who kept the city running, were often the ones most vulnerable to losing everything. Elon had always been driven by a desire to change the world, to build a future where technology solved problems. But this wasn't a problem technology could solve on its own. It was something deeper, something more fundamental. It was a problem of inequality, of the value placed on people's lives and work. Miriam and others like her were invisible in a city that had become a playground for the rich and powerful, where those who built the cities and cleaned up after the wealthy were being priced out. He knew he had to do something about it, and that something couldn't just be writing checks to individuals hoping to make the problem go away. No, it had to be bigger, systemic change that would benefit not just Miriam, but thousands of other essential workers. So, Elon began to think, to plan. He started by researching. He dug into the housing market, looking at the skyrocketing prices, the growing number of evictions, and the increasing numbers of service workers who were getting priced out of the cities they helped build. The more he read, the more he saw the same pattern. Workers were being pushed out, their labor undervalued, while the cost of living continued to rise at an unsustainable rate. He started looking into the numbers, the policies, the forces that had created this crisis, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility. The idea started to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but he had the resources to make a real impact. Elon's initial thoughts began to crystallize into a bold plan, one that would provide affordable housing, but not just housing. This would be a new way of thinking about how to build communities for the people who worked the hardest, who made everything possible but often didn't get the recognition or support they deserved. But it wasn't just about providing a roof over their heads. It would be about creating a community, a place where people could thrive, not just survive. He envisioned a model that combined affordable housing with services, healthcare, childcare, job training, and community support. This wasn't charity, it was empowerment. A place where workers could have a stable home and the resources to build a better future for themselves and their families. To test this idea, Elon needed more information, more real stories. He couldn't just rely on research papers or theoretical models. He needed to speak to more people like Miriam, people who had lived this reality. People who worked tirelessly to support the rich and powerful, but could barely afford to support themselves. So, Elon decided to go back to Miriam's neighborhood. The next afternoon, he met with her again, this time bringing along a small notebook to jot down thoughts. Miriam had told him about other workers in her building, neighbors who were in similar situations, working multiple jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, struggling with rising rents, and sometimes facing homelessness. When he arrived, Miriam was more than happy to introduce him to her neighbors. She led him to the small courtyard at the back of the building, where a group of people had gathered. They were sitting in folding chairs, some with children, some alone, but all with an air of weariness in their faces. Miriam introduced him, and the group was initially hesitant, unsure of why a wealthy tech mogul would want to talk to them. But as Elon spoke to them, listening to their stories, he felt the gravity of the issue. One woman, Maid, worked as a home health aide. She spent her days caring for elderly clients, but barely made enough to pay rent in her tiny apartment. Without me, she said, they would be in nursing homes. But I can barely save enough for myself. Elon nodded thoughtfully, taking notes. Another man, Vicente, had worked as a gardener for the city for over 40 years. His hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, his back bent with age. He had raised a family in San Francisco, but now struggled to make ends meet. His rent was steadily increasing, and though he'd spent his entire life contributing to the city, he felt invisible, forgotten. The city I helped build is pushing me out, he said bitterly, and I don't know what to do. Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of their words. These were the people who made the city run, who kept everything functioning smoothly, but they were being pushed out, just like Miriam. He asked them what they needed most, and the answers were surprisingly similar. affordable housing, healthcare, job security, community support. Miriam added, "We don't want handouts. We want a chance to live with dignity." Elon's mind was racing. These are the people who made cities like San Francisco possible, yet they were being treated like disposable labor. The system wasn't just failing Miriam and her neighbors. It was failing so many others across the country. "I have an idea," Elon said to the group, his voice calm, but with a sense of purpose. "I think it's time we rethink how we do housing in this country. You deserve better than what's being offered right now. I'm going to work on something that will provide affordable homes, but more than that, it's going to be a community, a place where you can feel safe, supported, and valued." The group looked at him skeptically, unsure of what to make of this offer. But as Elon spoke, something shifted. They started to see that this wasn't just another empty promise. It was someone who actually cared about their lives and was willing to put his resources behind it. "Why are you doing this?" Miriam asked, her voice soft, a little uncertain. "Because you matter," Elon replied simply. "Because the people who make this city work, the cleaners, the gardeners, the healthcare workers, deserve more than just to survive. You deserve to thrive." Miriam's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "I'll help in any way I can." "I know you will," Elon said, his voice steady. "This is just the beginning." In the following weeks, Elon dedicated more and more time to his new initiative. As much as he was passionate about his companies, SpaceX, Tesla, and the others, he couldn't shake the feeling that this new project, born from his encounter with Miriam and the others in her neighborhood, was the most important work he could be doing right now. The idea had grown beyond just providing a few people with temporary relief. It was clear that the systemic issues Miriam and her neighbors were facing were part of a much bigger problem, one that couldn't be fixed by just throwing money at it. This wasn't about charity. It was about creating a new model, one that would offer sustainable, affordable housing for essential workers, those who worked tirelessly to keep the city running but couldn't afford to live in it. Elon began working on a blueprint for what he called Dignity Homes. The idea was simple in its ambition: to create communities for essential workers that provided not just affordable housing, but also services that would help residents build a better life. He envisioned these communities offering everything from childcare and healthcare to job training and educational resources, giving people the tools to not only survive but thrive. But as Elon began to outline the specifics of the project, he quickly realized how difficult it would be to bring it to life. The housing market, especially in cities like San Francisco, was a labyrinth of regulations, zoning laws, and entrenched interests. Real estate developers, city officials, and landlords had a lot to gain from keeping the current system intact. Changing that would mean taking on powerful forces. Elon was no stranger to taking on tough challenges. His companies had faced immense obstacles before. But this was different. This wasn't just about building rockets or electric cars. It was about reshaping how society viewed housing and workers. It would require not only money and resources, but also a complete shift in how people thought about affordable living. He knew he couldn't do this alone. So, Elon reached out to experts, urban planners, architects, legal teams, and social scientists who understood the complexities of affordable housing and community development. His goal was clear: create a model that could be replicated in cities across the country, one that would provide real, lasting change for workers like Miriam, Vicente, and May. As the team began to form, they quickly encountered the first of many roadblocks. The legal and regulatory landscape was a minefield. Zoning laws in many cities made it nearly impossible to build affordable housing without navigating a complex web of permits, reviews, and restrictions. In San Francisco, where the housing crisis was especially dire, the process was even more convoluted. Developers who were willing to build affordable housing faced constant opposition from powerful lobbying groups that were focused on preserving high rental prices for their own financial gain. Elon sat down with his team to discuss how they could circumvent these obstacles. The first idea was to buy land through community land trusts, a model where the land itself was owned collectively by the community and the buildings were either rented or owned by residents. This would help prevent the kind of gentrification that had driven people like Miriam out of the city in the first place. "It's a bold idea," said Janet, one of the team's key advisors. "But it's going to be tough to sell. You'll need to convince people that this isn't just a short-term solution, but something that can have a lasting impact." Elon nodded. He knew that getting the legal framework in place was going to be a challenge. But it was the only way to ensure that this vision wasn't just another gentrification project. The land would belong to the community, not investors, and the goal wasn't to turn a profit, but to create a sustainable, equitable solution for everyone. Over the next few months, Elon's team worked tirelessly, designing the first prototype of the Dignity Homes community. They worked with architects to design energy-efficient homes that were affordable and sustainable. They brainstormed ways to incorporate green spaces, playgrounds, and community centers into the design, so residents wouldn't just live in a building, they would live in a true community. They worked with healthcare professionals to integrate medical services into the model and job training programs that would allow residents to build better futures for themselves. But with every breakthrough came new challenges. The city of San Francisco was a maze of bureaucracy, and even with the support of some city officials, the pushback from the real estate industry was relentless. Developers who had built high-rise luxury apartments in the city were not happy with the idea of affordable housing models that could disrupt their profits. They launched campaigns to discredit the project, calling it unrealistic and too idealistic. One afternoon, after a particularly heated meeting with the City Planning Commission, Elon stood in his office, staring out at the city below. He could feel the weight of the opposition growing heavier with every passing day. But he couldn't back down now, not after everything Miriam and her neighbors had shared with him. He sat down at his desk and pulled out his notebook. The idea was simple. The people who kept the city functioning, whether they were housekeepers, delivery drivers, or janitors, deserved to live in the city they served. If the wealthiest individuals and tech moguls could afford to live in this city, so should those who cleaned their offices, taught their children, and took care of their elderly parents. "I have to keep pushing forward," Elon muttered to himself. "This has to work." Elon didn't just want to solve the problem for a few people. He wanted to create a model that could spread nationwide. He envisioned a future where cities could be reshaped to better serve the people who made them run, not just the wealthy elite. This wasn't about charity. It was about creating a system where everyone could live with dignity, no matter their job. That evening, he made a call to Miriam. "I wanted to check in and see how you're doing," he said, his voice calm but purposeful. "I'm hanging in there," Miriam said with a sigh. "It's hard, but I'm managing. I've been thinking," Elon said, "and I think we need to make this bigger. I want to build something that not only helps you, but helps thousands of people who are in the same situation. People who work their entire lives, but are never given a chance to build real security. I need your help, Miriam. You and your neighbors, their voices are going to be part of this." Miriam was silent for a moment, processing his words. "You really think you can change things?" "I'm going to try," Elon said, his voice unwavering. "And I'm going to need people like you, people who have lived through this, to help make sure it works." Miriam's voice softened. "I'm in, Elon. You've already done so much for me. Let me help." And with that, Elon knew that this project, this vision, was no longer just his. It was theirs. It was a movement that would grow far beyond his initial dream. But he also knew that the road ahead would be full of obstacles, that the fight would be long, and that some people wouldn't want to see change. But Elon wasn't backing down. This was a fight worth having. Elon spent the next few weeks working tirelessly with his team. The more they delved into the details of the Dignity Homes project, the clearer it became that this was no small undertaking. He had always been accustomed to navigating complex systems, but this project was different. It wasn't just about launching a new product or designing a new technology. It was about changing the way society viewed essential workers, the very backbone of every city, who had been largely ignored in discussions about housing. His vision for Dignity Homes was taking shape. They were creating something much larger than a housing solution. It was a new way of thinking about communities designed to empower the workers who made cities like San Francisco function. The idea was to create a self-sustaining community where workers could live, thrive, and access services that would help them and their families flourish. He envisioned places where people wouldn't just have a roof over their heads, but access to healthcare, childcare, job training, and education. But Elon knew that despite the well-meaning plans, the project was still in its infancy. The concept was bold, and he expected resistance, not just from the real estate industry, but from politicians, developers, and even some of his own advisors. Change of this magnitude often brought out the worst in those with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. One evening, as he sat in his office, staring at a large map of San Francisco, Elon's assistant knocked on the door. "Elon, we've got a problem," she said, handing him a news article. The headline screamed, "Musk's new housing plan. A radical disruption or a pipe dream?" Elon's heart sank as he skimmed the article, which painted his vision as nothing more than an idealistic fantasy. Critics claimed that the project would never work, that the cost was too high, and that it would disrupt the city's real estate market. They called it social engineering, an impossible venture led by a billionaire out of touch with the reality of city planning. He set the article down with a sigh. He'd known this was coming. His plan wasn't about charity or handouts. It was about long-term structural change. But the media wasn't interested in that. They wanted controversy, and they were more than happy to frame him as a fool for thinking he could tackle a problem of this magnitude. Elon spent the next few days meeting with his legal team, looking over the numbers and refining his approach. He had always been a disruptor, but this felt different. This was about people, not products. His mind kept returning to Miriam's face, to the stories of Vicente and Maid, to the hundreds of people he had met who were struggling to stay afloat. They didn't need just a handout. They needed something more permanent, something that would allow them to build their futures with dignity. He called Miriam to update her on the progress. "The media is starting to turn on us," he said, his tone frustrated but determined. "But I'm not backing down. This project will work. It has to." Miriam's voice came through the phone, calm and supportive. "You're not in this alone, Elon. You've already done more for us than we ever thought possible. Keep going. You have more people behind you than you realize." Encouraged by her words, Elon pressed on. He gathered his team again, this time to prepare for the next big step, taking the project public. The day of the press conference arrived, and the anticipation was palpable. Elon stood before a crowd of reporters, city officials, and members of the community. He had invited Miriam to attend, as well as a few of her neighbors who had become key voices in the project. The room was full of skeptical faces, many from the media and real estate industry. But there was also a sense of hope among those who had been part of the journey from the beginning. Elon stood at the podium, his mind racing. This wasn't just another announcement. It was a declaration, a commitment. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady but passionate. "What I'm announcing here today isn't just another housing project. It's the beginning of something much bigger, a movement that will change the way we think about housing, work, and community." The room was silent as he spoke, and for a moment, he could see the skepticism in the eyes of the reporters in the front row. But he pushed on. "This project isn't about charity. It's about creating opportunities for people who have been left behind. The workers who make our cities run but can't afford to live in them. The people who clean our offices, teach our children, and care for our elderly. These people deserve more than just a paycheck. They deserve to live with dignity. And that's what Dignity Homes is all about." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "We're not just building homes. We're building communities, places where people can thrive, where they have access to everything they need to succeed. Affordable housing, healthcare, job training, and the support of a community that cares about them." There were murmurs in the crowd, and a few questions started to rise, but Elon wasn't finished yet. "This isn't a quick fix," he said. "This is a long-term solution. We are committing to a multi-year, multi-city approach. We're starting in San Francisco, but we plan to expand to other cities that face the same challenges. And we're not doing it alone. I'm calling on other business leaders, politicians, and citizens to join us. Together, we can create a world where everyone, no matter their job, can afford to live in the city they help build." The room fell silent again, And for a moment, Elon wasn't sure what kind of reaction he would get. But then, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. "Mr. Musk," a reporter asked, "how do you plan to make this financially viable? There are critics who say that your plan is far too ambitious and will only result in failure." Elon smiled. "The critics have their doubts, but the truth is the status quo isn't working. The system is broken, and it's failing the very people who are essential to our success. We're going to do this differently. We have the resources to make it happen, and we're partnering with experts in urban planning, healthcare, and education to make sure we get it right." Another reporter spoke up. "But how can you ensure that this model will be sustainable long-term?" "This is about more than just building buildings," Elon replied. "We're building a model for the future, a model that's designed to be self-sustaining. The land will be owned by the community, and residents will have the opportunity to build equity over time. This isn't about giving people handouts. It's about creating a system where they can stand on their own feet and build wealth while also being part of something bigger than themselves." The questions kept coming, but Elon answered each one with the same passion and conviction. By the end of the press conference, there was no doubt in his mind that this was just the beginning. The movement had already begun. Later that evening, as he sat down to review the coverage, Elon saw that the press had begun to turn. While there were still plenty of critics, the overall tone had shifted. People were beginning to understand what he was trying to do, and more importantly, they were starting to believe that it was possible. As he closed his laptop, a message came through from Miriam. "You did it. You've already changed the conversation. I'm proud of you, Elon." Elon smiled, his resolve stronger than ever. This was just the beginning, but he knew that they were on the right path. The world was about to change, and it would start with the people who had always been overlooked. The people who had made the city great, but had never been given the chance to thrive. The press conference had been a turning point, but Elon knew that the real work was just beginning. He had expected resistance, but the level of scrutiny was more intense than he had anticipated. The media continued to question his motives, real estate developers doubled down on their criticisms, and even some of his own advisors were wary. But despite the opposition, a growing movement had begun to take root. In the days following the press conference, something incredible happened. People from all over the country began reaching out to express their support. Emails flooded in, and social media was abuzz with messages of encouragement. Miriam's phone rang constantly with calls from friends and family, and even strangers, thanking her for her courage in speaking out. For the first time in years, people like her, the workers who kept everything running, felt seen. Elon wasn't naive. He knew that the fight wouldn't be easy. Powerful forces stood in opposition. But what had started as an idea born from a chance encounter with Miriam had begun to grow into something far bigger, something that could change the way cities thought about housing and the essential workers who made them thrive. Despite the media firestorm, Elon's resolve didn't waver. He spent the next few weeks meeting with city officials, urban planners, and community leaders. He wanted to ensure that the initial pilot project in San Francisco would be successful, that it would stand as a proof of concept for other cities across the country. He called Miriam regularly to check in, and she became one of his closest allies in the fight. She was more than just a grateful recipient of his help. She was a true partner, someone who had lived the struggles and understood firsthand what was at stake. Miriam began organizing meetings with her neighbors, some of whom had also become invested in the project. They started to create a community of their own, planning out what they wanted to see in the new housing developments. Elon also brought in Rosa Diaz, an expert in urban inequality and social justice, to help guide the project. Rosa had been following Elon's progress from the sidelines, and when he reached out to her, she jumped at the opportunity to be involved. She understood the nuances of the housing crisis in a way that Elon never could, and her expertise was crucial to ensuring the project would succeed. People don't just need homes, Rosa explained to Elon during one of their many strategy sessions. They need community, support, and access to resources that allow them to build better lives for themselves and their families. You're on the right track, but it's not enough just to provide housing. You need to create a system that supports them long-term. Elon listened intently, taking her words to heart. The more he spoke to people like Miriam, And the more he worked with experts like Rosa, the more he realized how far-reaching the problem was. It wasn't just about building houses. It was about rebuilding the social fabric of communities that had been torn apart by rising costs and economic inequality. With Rosa's help, the team refined a vision for Dignity Homes, making sure that every aspect of the plan was designed with the well-being of the residents in mind. They worked on incorporating green spaces, educational programs, and healthcare services into the model. They also devised a system where residents would have the opportunity to build equity in their homes, preventing future displacement as prices in the surrounding areas continued to rise. Meanwhile, the city of San Francisco, while initially resistant, started to see the potential of the project. Elon worked closely with local officials, emphasizing that Dignity Homes wasn't just about affordable housing. It was about strengthening the city's workforce and ensuring that essential workers could continue to live in the city they helped build. The idea of using community land trusts to ensure long-term affordability gained traction, and by the end of the month, they had secured an agreement to move forward with the first development site. It was a small victory, but an important one. It showed that, with persistence, change was possible. The project would move ahead, and for the first time, there was a sense of hope that the system could be disrupted. But even as progress was being made, Elon knew that the journey was far from over. The opposition was still strong, and the risks were enormous. Some of his closest advisors were still hesitant about the project, concerned that it would stretch his resources too thin and damage the reputation of his companies. The media continued to paint him as an idealistic billionaire trying to change the world in a way that seemed, to many, impossible. Yet, despite the criticisms, Elon couldn't shake the sense of responsibility he felt toward the people he had met through this project. Miriam and her neighbors had opened his eyes to a reality he hadn't fully understood before. These were the people who kept the city running, who did the work that no one else wanted to do, and yet they were the ones who were getting priced out of the places they had worked so hard to build. On a late afternoon, a few weeks after the press conference, Elon visited Miriam's neighborhood again. He wanted to see for himself how things were going, to check in with her and the people who had come to be part of this movement. When he arrived, he found Miriam and a few others gathered at the community center, a small, run-down building that had become a gathering place for neighbors and supporters. Miriam greeted him with a warm smile, her face lit up with hope. "It's good to see you again, Elon. You're really doing this, aren't you?" Elon nodded. "I am. We're starting small, but we're going to do it right. This is just the beginning." As they sat down and discussed the next steps, Elon couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The idea that it started as a simple act of kindness, helping Miriam pay her rent, was turning into a movement that could change the future of housing in America. When he left that evening, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but he was no longer alone in the fight. He had Miriam and her neighbors, his team, and countless supporters who had come together for something bigger than themselves. Together, they were creating something that could reshape cities, provide dignity to workers, and offer a better future for all. The first Dignity Homes community was still a long way from completion, but the momentum was building. And for the first time in a long time, Elon felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. Despite the growing momentum of the Dignity Homes project, the challenges were far from over. While the support for the initiative continued to grow, the resistance also increased. As Elon and his team worked to secure land, navigate city regulations, and garner public support, they also found themselves at odds with powerful groups that stood to lose from this massive shift in the housing market. Real estate developers, city officials with ties to the industry, and some of Elon's closest allies within his own companies began to voice their concerns. It was one thing to dream big, but turning that dream into reality was proving to be an uphill battle. Elon spent many sleepless nights working with his legal team to ensure that the Dignity Homes model could stand up to scrutiny. They had already won approval for the first pilot community in San Francisco, but the zoning laws were still a hurdle. In a city like San Francisco, where housing was scarce and expensive, developers had a significant influence. They were already pushing back, filing lawsuits to prevent the project from moving forward. "Elon, we've got a problem," Janet, one of his trusted advisors, said one evening, her face grim. She sat down beside him, holding a stack of papers. "We've received a legal challenge from a coalition of developers and property managers. They're claiming that our model is anti-competitive and violates zoning laws. They're also pushing for a full-scale review of the project's viability." Elon took a deep breath. This wasn't unexpected, but it was still a blow. They had anticipated some pushback, but the legal challenges were more aggressive than he had hoped. The developers had powerful allies in the city government, and the influence they wielded could delay or even derail the project entirely. "We knew this was going to happen," Elon said, leaning back in his chair. "We need to prepare for a long fight, but we can't back down. This project is about more than just a few people or a few buildings. It's about changing the system." He paused, his mind racing as he processed the information. "Janet, what's the worst-case scenario here?" "The worst-case scenario is that the city blocks our zoning permits," she said, "and they begin a campaign to discredit the project. We might lose public support if the narrative shifts against us. The developers will spin this as an attempt to destroy the housing market and harm economic growth." Elon looked out the window, his mind turning over the consequences. But as he thought about it, something inside him shifted. This was exactly why he had started this project in the first place. To challenge the status quo. To fight for something that went against the grain of what was easy and convenient for those at the top. "You're right," Elon said, his voice firm. "But I didn't get to where I am by doing what was easy. We're going to need to rally support from the community. We'll need the people who this project is going to help to speak up. Miriam, Vicente, Maid, and the others, they're our voice." That afternoon, Elon met with Miriam and a few others from the neighborhood. Miriam had become one of his most vocal supporters, and Elon had seen the way her voice had gained strength as the project grew. She had become an advocate, not just for herself, but for her entire community. "We're up against a wall," Elon said, his tone serious. "The developers are fighting back hard, and the city is facing increasing pressure to stop us. We need you to help us tell the world why this matters. Why we can't let people like you, like Vicente, like May, be pushed out of the city." Miriam nodded. "I understand. We've already been through so much. This city, San Francisco, has become a place where the people who work hardest are the ones who can't afford to live here anymore. We need to fight for what's right." Vicente, who had become a strong ally in the effort, added, "We've already lost so much. I worked for the city my whole life, helping make it the place it is, and now I'm being pushed out because I can't afford to live here. If we don't do something now, who will?" May, the home health aide, agreed. "We've been invisible for so long. It's time to show the city that we matter. This project isn't just about houses. It's about giving us the dignity and respect we deserve." Elon felt a surge of energy at their words. They were the ones who had the real power in this fight. It wasn't just about his money or his influence. It was about their stories. The people who had built the city, who had worked tirelessly and with pride, were the ones who had the right to determine how their future would unfold. "I'll do whatever it takes," Elon said, determination in his voice. "We'll fight back with everything we've got. This isn't just about a project anymore. It's about a movement, and we're going to win." The next few days were a whirlwind. Elon and Miriam met with local activists, city planners, and other community leaders. They held town hall meetings, gathered signatures, and spoke to the media. Miriam became the face of the movement, speaking passionately about the struggles of the working class in San Francisco. Her story resonated with so many people who had worked their whole lives, who had built the city only to find themselves unable to afford to live in it. The media coverage became more positive as well. While there were still skeptics, the tide was slowly turning. More and more people saw the value in creating communities where people could not only afford to live, but could also access the resources they needed to thrive. And then a breakthrough came. A group of prominent local businesses, including tech companies that had previously been hesitant, began to publicly support the initiative. They recognized the importance of addressing the housing crisis not just for the well-being of workers, but for the overall health of the economy. Elon's phone rang one morning with a call from an unlikely source, a real estate developer who had been vocal in his opposition. Elon, the developer, said, "I think it's time we sat down and talked. I've been thinking about your proposal. It's not perfect, but there's something here. Let's figure out how we can work together to make this happen." It was a turning point, a sign that despite the resistance, the project was gaining the traction it needed to succeed. The legal battles were far from over, but Elon had the support of the community, and he had the momentum. The Dignity Homes initiative was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality, and as each new ally joined the cause, the project grew stronger. As Elon watched the support for Dignity Homes grow, he realized just how much more this project had become than he ever intended. It had become a movement, a shift in how people thought about housing, work, and community. For the first time, essential workers, the ones who had been overlooked for so long, were starting to be seen. The weight of what was at stake grew heavier with each passing day. After the breakthrough with the developer who had initially opposed the project, Elon and his team worked quickly to meet with other interested parties. The deal wasn't sealed yet, but the willingness to collaborate was a significant step in the right direction. If the real estate developers were willing to get on board, it could provide the crucial financial backing needed to expand the project beyond San Francisco. However, even as the momentum built, so did the pressure. The city was still divided. Some politicians remained staunchly against the project, arguing that it would undermine the market and the city's economic growth. But others began to see the potential of the model, particularly as more and more people came forward with their own stories of housing insecurity. As the community rallied behind the cause, it became harder for the opposition to dismiss the project. For Elon, it wasn't just about securing financial backing or political approval. It was about ensuring that the people at the heart of this movement, Miriam, Vicente, Maid, and all the others, had a genuine voice in how the project evolved. He understood now that their stories weren't just anecdotes. They were the backbone of the entire initiative. It was their experiences that had brought him to this point, and their input was critical to shaping the future of Dignity Homes. One evening, Miriam, Vicente, and May met with Elon and Rosa at the community center, the same place where it all began. The small building had transformed over the weeks, becoming a symbol of hope for the workers in the neighborhood. The walls were lined with messages of support, and a large map of San Francisco hung on the wall, showing the potential sites for future Dignity Homes developments. "We're almost there," Elon said, looking at the group. "The legal challenges are still ongoing, but we've secured enough support that I think we can push this forward. The first community is going to happen, but I need your help to make sure we get it right." Miriam nodded. "We're all in, Elon. We've been working on what we want to see in these communities, what we need. It's not just about having a place to live. It's about having access to the resources that will help us build a better future for ourselves and our families." Vicente added, "People don't just want a roof over their heads. They want dignity. They want to feel like their lives matter, that their work has value. These communities have to reflect that. People should be able to thrive, not just survive." Elon's eyes met theirs, and for a moment, he saw the future unfold in front of him. This wasn't just about providing homes. It was about creating an ecosystem where people could live, grow, and contribute to something bigger than themselves. The idea had started with a simple act of kindness, but now it had become a fight for the soul of the city, for the future of essential workers everywhere. Over the next few weeks, Elon and the team continued to refine the design of the first Dignity Homes community. They worked with urban planners to create a space that was not only affordable, but sustainable. Green spaces, community gardens, and solar panels were incorporated into the design, ensuring that the homes would be energy efficient and eco-friendly. Healthcare centers, daycare facilities, and job training hubs were also part of the plan, creating a self-sustaining environment where residents could access everything they needed to thrive. But as they prepared for the final approval, they faced one last major obstacle: public opposition. The real estate developers, who had been vocal critics of the project, began to push back harder. They organized protests, rallied against the community land trust model and tried to paint Elon and the Dignity Homes project as a radical, unworkable idea. They claimed it would collapse the housing market, displace middle-class families, and create more harm than good. Elon knew this was a make-or-break moment. The developers had deep pockets and political influence, but they didn't have the support of the people. The community, the very people Dignity Homes was meant to serve, was standing behind the project, and it was up to Elon and his team to make sure that their voices were heard above the noise. "We need to go public again," Elon said, meeting with his team. "We need to show the world that this isn't just about buildings. It's about changing the system. We have the facts on our side. We need to mobilize the community, get them involved, and get the media on our side." Rosa, who had been instrumental in organizing grassroots support, agreed. "We've already built a strong coalition. Now it's time to take it to the streets. We need to show the developers and the media that this is a movement that can't be stopped." Elon and his team made the decision to hold a public rally in San Francisco, right outside the site of the first Dignity Homes development. They invited community members, activists, and supporters from all over the city to join them. The rally was intended to show the developers, city officials, and the media that this wasn't just a project. It was a movement that was ready to change the way cities viewed housing and workers. On the day of the rally, the turnout was far beyond what anyone had expected. The streets were lined with people carrying signs that read, "Homes for workers, dignity for all," and "Stop the displacement." The crowd was diverse. Workers from every corner of the city, families, activists, and allies who saw the value in the Dignity Homes model. Elon took the stage, standing beside Miriam, Vicente, Maid, and Rosa. He looked out at the sea of faces and felt a surge of pride. These were the people he had been fighting for. And now, they were fighting for themselves. "We're not just fighting for a place to live," Elon began, his voice rising with passion. "We're fighting for dignity, for the right to live in the city we help build. The people here, people like Miriam, Vicente, and Maid, they are the ones who make this city run. And they deserve more than just a paycheck. They deserve to live with dignity in a community that supports them." The crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the air palpable. "The developers can try to tear us down," Elon continued, "but they can't take away the power of the people. We're the ones who built this city, and we're going to build a new future. A future where everyone has the right to live with dignity." Miriam spoke next, her voice strong and unwavering. "For years, we've been invisible. We've worked hard, but we've been pushed aside. This project isn't just about homes. It's about showing the world that we matter, that our work matters. We're not just cleaning offices or taking care of people. We're building this city. And now, it's time for this city to take care of us." The crowd cheered, and as Elon looked out over the sea of supporters, he knew that this was just the beginning. The opposition was fierce, but the people had spoken. They were ready for change, and Elon was determined to make sure that Dignity Homes would be the catalyst for that change. The rally was a resounding success. The energy in the air was electric, and the message was clear. The people had spoken, and they wanted change. The Dignity Homes project was no longer just an idea. It had become a movement, a call for fairness, dignity, and respect for those who had been overlooked for far too long. As Elon left the rally, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about something much bigger, about showing the world that things didn't have to stay the way they were. The developers who had opposed the project now found themselves on the defensive. The rally had garnered national attention, and the media began to cover the movement in a way that hadn't happened before. The story wasn't just about Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur. It was about the workers who had been left behind, the people who were fighting for their right to live with dignity. People began to see the reality of the situation and recognize the importance of what Elon was trying to do. Back at his office, Elon sat with his team, discussing the next steps. The legal battles were far from over, but the momentum was now on their side. With the rally behind them, the public had spoken, and it was becoming increasingly difficult for the opposition to ignore the growing support for the project. "We're not just fighting for affordable housing," Elon said. looking around the table at his team. We're fighting for a new way of thinking, a way that values the people who make cities work, the people who do the jobs that no one else wants to do. These are the people who make everything possible, and it's time they get the respect and support they deserve. Rosa, who had been instrumental in organizing the community, nodded. We've made incredible progress. The public is with us, and we have the backing of the people who matter most. But we can't get complacent. There's still a long road ahead, and we need to keep pushing forward. The next few weeks saw a flurry of activity. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to secure the necessary permits and funding for the first Dignity Homes development. The opposition was still strong, but the growing support for the project helped keep the momentum going. More and more businesses began to pledge their support, recognizing that this wasn't just about housing. It was about the future of cities and the people who made them thrive. As the approval process moved forward, Elon made regular trips to Miriam's neighborhood. It was important to him that the community remained at the heart of the project. Miriam, Vicente, and May became central figures in the movement, sharing their stories and experiences with the media, helping to shift public opinion. One afternoon, Elon sat with Miriam in a small cafe near her apartment. She had become not just a friend, but a trusted ally. Her strength and determination had been a driving force behind the project, and Elon was grateful for her support. "You've come a long way," Elon said, smiling. "From that rainy afternoon when we first met to now, I never imagined it would grow into something like this." Miriam smiled back, her eyes shining with pride. "I didn't know either, but I always believed in the idea. You didn't just want to help me. You wanted to change everything. And that's what we're doing." Elon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We are. But it's not just about housing. It's about creating communities. It's about showing people that they matter, that their work matters." As the weeks went by, the first Dignity Homes community slowly began to take shape. Construction crews broke ground, and the project started to move from paper to reality. The city, which had been so resistant at first, now stood behind the initiative. City officials began to see the long-term benefits of the project, not just for the workers, but for the city as a whole. The Dignity Homes model could serve as a blueprint for other cities, offering a sustainable, community-focused approach to affordable housing. One afternoon, Miriam walked with Elon through the construction site. They stood on the land where the first community would be built, looking out at the future that was slowly coming to life. "I can't believe it's happening," Miriam said, her voice full of emotion. "I've been here for so long, working, struggling, and now we're going to have a place to live that's not just a place to survive, but to thrive." Elon looked at her, his expression soft. "You helped make this happen. Your voice, your story. Without that, none of this would be possible." Miriam smiled, her eyes glistening. "I just want a chance to live with dignity. And now we have that, all of us." As they stood together, watching the workers build the homes that would soon house Miriam, Vicente, May, and countless others, Elon felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just about real estate or profits. It was about creating something that would impact lives for generations to come. A few months later, the first Dignity Homes community was ready for its residents. The opening ceremony was a celebration of everything they had accomplished. Elon stood before a crowd of workers, activists, and community members, many of whom had been part of the journey from the beginning. Miriam, Vicente, May, and the others stood by his side, their faces filled with pride and hope for the future. "This is just the beginning," Elon said to the crowd, his voice strong. "What we've built here today is more than just a group of homes. It's a community, a place where people can live, work, and thrive. A place where they can build a better future for themselves and their families." The crowd erupted in applause, and Miriam stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Elon. Thank you for believing in us, for seeing us, for giving us the chance to live with dignity." The ribbon was cut, and the first residents began to move in. For Miriam, Vicente, May, and the others, it was the start of a new chapter. They had gone from being invisible to becoming the heart of a movement that would change cities forever. As Elon watched them walk into their new homes, he felt a sense of fulfillment that no business deal or product launch had ever given him. He had always known that he wanted to change the world, but now he realized that the true change came not from rockets or cars, but from lifting up the people who had always been there, working tirelessly in the background. It wasn't just about building homes. It was about building a future where everyone could live with dignity, respect, and opportunity. And that future had just begun.